It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses of all ages, welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, May 7th, 2024, and it is time to get nerdy. Welcome to episode 305 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest gaming podcast in the multiverse. I am Maction, one of your co-hosts. I am joined tonight by the other co-host, Mr. Lam Galuka, also known as Mr. Nice Guy 425, a stand-up comedian, stand-up guy, and my bestie. And for the next hour, we're going to cover topics about video games ranging everywhere from news to history to trivia and lawsuits and everything in between. But first, Mr. Nice Guy, it has been a couple of weeks. How are you doing, man?
Dude, I'm doing really, really well. It's funny because we've always said, or at least I've always said in my mind, never going to use the podcast as a means of leveraging a bad business experience, a bad life experience, and I never will. And I never will. This week, Mac is smiling because we were talking off camera. This week came with some challenges. That's all I'll say. Like, I go by Mr. Nice Guy. I am generally a happy person. Occasionally things happen that make me not so happy. But, I always like to try to take the high road, and I hope that our listeners and our viewers do the same in their interactions. And that is what I will say about that. But Mac, on a positive note, man, excited for a trip back to my hometown next week. It's for work, primarily, but I will get to spend some time with family. And when I'm not working in the evenings, like as I get out there early, probably going to do a little bit of retro game shopping. Probably going to eat some good food. If you're ever in the Seattle area, there is a fantastic burger place called Dick's Drive-In that has very reasonably priced burgers, fries, and shakes, and I believe they have scoops of ice cream as well. And so I'll probably eat there once or twice and hang out with my brother, see my parents, and then do some business. So I'm excited for that.
That sounds fantastic. And just so you know, Dix, you can sponsor this show. We can be bought incredibly cheaply.
You absolutely can. Free burgers is all it would really take. You would just have to get them out to where we live, which is not in the Seattle area.
It's true. That would take a bit of doing. But, Mr. Nice Guy, I don't have anything nearly as interesting coming up. I've got, I'm going to fly back to Utah in June to go see some friends, but, that's the nearest travel plans I have. Everything else is just sort of run-of-the-mill, do things at home, but it's been a nice, quiet past week or so, and this week is looking to be amazing weather, so I'm looking forward to getting outside in a way that the Pacific Northwest doesn't always let you with inclement weather. So, looking forward to some sunshine and some walks outside. But that's me.
Well, Mac, I do gotta say, I had a pretty phenomenal weekend, while we're talking about stuff that we've been doing.
Uh-huh.
So I took my son camping with a huge group of people, and I was in charge of smoking the meat. Right? Because that's what I do.
They chose wisely.
They chose wisely. Now, I smoked 6 pork butts, which basically is pulled pork, if you're for the uninitiated who don't know. And it's easy to smoke 1 pork butt. It's easy to maybe even smoke 2. Luckily, I have a bad smoker. And when I say bad, I mean good, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a big boy smoker. It fits 6 pulled porks on there. And so I smoked them all, I seasoned them, I spritzed them with root beer for the whole time. Started them at 4 in the morning, and by that evening, they were ready to go, and everyone was so hyped. People were coming back for seconds, thirds. I was helping serve the food. They were like, yo, I need you to pile it high on my bun. And it reminded me of that moment in Parks and Recreation where, I forget the guy's name, Nick Offerman's character.
Ron Swanson.
He's a man's man, and he says, he goes to a restaurant for breakfast, he says, I need all of the bacon and eggs that you have. Let me be very clear. Not a lot of bacon and eggs, not some of the bacon and eggs. I need all of the bacon and eggs that you have. And Mac, that is how good my pulled pork was. People were coming back for seconds and thirds. That was Friday night. Slept outside, had a great time. Saturday night, Mac, Kentucky Derby. Now, do you watch the Kentucky Derby? Is that your thing?
No, but as a sports ball expert, I am also a horse racing expert, at least in theory, too.
Now, see, I know very, very little about the Kentucky Derby, but I do know that it's an excuse to get dressed up with my neighbors. Go to my neighbor's house who lives a few doors down, who I really like. I like these people and all the people in my neighborhood. Have some good food, have some conversation, and hear funny stories from my neighbors, and we'll leave it at that. So,
well, hang on, before we leave it there, dressed up, are we talking like monocles and top hats?
We're talking suits, we're talking nice shoes, we're talking brightly colored clothes as if we were actually at Churchill Downs in person. And then I'm not one who drinks alcohol, but they have mint juleps. And what I will say is once the mint juleps start flowing, the party starts at 3 o'clock. By 5:30, people are telling me all types of things that they probably wish they hadn't told me. And it's always a fun time. So love my neighbors, love the neighborhood. Kentucky Derby is secondary to the food and the conversation. And Mac, on that note, I say we do what we do best and hop right up in that gaming news, my friend. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Mr. Nice Guy, I am out of the loop. What is new in video gaming, sir?
Dude, there's so much, and we're going to start with this news story on episode 305. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to talk about a couple game studios that were shut down today on IGN.com. This is written by Ryan Dinsdale. The video game industry has reacted with shock and anger after Microsoft shut down several game studios today, May 7th, 2024, including Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks, the developers of Redfall and Hi-Fi Rush, respectively. Both developers and fans have shared their disappointment at the closures, announced to staff via email on the morning of May 7th. Head of Xbox Game Studios, Matt Booty, told employees of the studios, which joined Microsoft under Bethesda parent company ZeniMax, the cuts were the result of a reprioritization of titles and resources. Now, Mac, I want you to start thinking through this because studio acquisition now resulting in layoffs. We'll talk about that in a moment. Quote, "This is absolutely terrible," wrote Arcane Lion director Dinga Bakaba on Twitter, whose studio survived the closures and will continue working on Marvel's Blade. "This is an important quote to any executive reading this," he says. "Friendly reminder that video games are an entertainment and cultural industry, and your business as a corporation is to take care of your artists and entertainers and help them create value for you." I will not read the whole quote, but he goes on and says more and more about that. Mac, I also want to note that Arcane was working on an update to Redfall, which was not received positively at its release. Although Hi-Fi Rush, made by Tango, was in like Indie Game of the Year conversations.
Yeah.
So Microsoft acquires Bethesda, ZeniMax, etc., and now lays off a bunch of people. What are your thoughts?
It's a darn shame, and my goodness, I kind of wish we didn't have to be in this situation, but it feels like we're always kind of returning to this sort of thing. Like, one company buys up another and then lays off a bunch. Now, I mean, you would have to... Microsoft has a long way to go if they want to catch up to EA Games and several of the other studios that have the other publishers that have spent the past decade buying up smaller game studios and shutting them down. It is a worrying trend because, yeah, like you said, Redfall didn't exactly go that well, even though it looked like it had some promise. Early things made it look good. Hi-Fi Rush, definitely well received, well loved, and I think still reasonably well played.
Yeah.
These developers found out the morning that everybody else found out that they were getting laid off. And I think that is a darn shame. Mr. Nice Guy, what do we know also about the fate of those very games? That the studios who made them were shut down.
I can only assume that Hi-Fi Rush will stay on platforms, but without future updates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once the studio gets shut down, it's really hard to keep on top of the game, and who knows what was in the works and what was planned in terms of new content. As far as Redfall, I mean, I assume that it's just going to stay in the state that it's in.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be unplayable, but it sounds like from what I was reading, they were working on a few different modes and patches. And Mac, that raises the other question. Well, we'll get to that later when we talk about another story. I guess maybe I'll share my thoughts on this whole thing. And I don't want to be too derivative of what others are saying in the industry. I honestly haven't listened to other commentary on this, as it just happened today. It's obvious that it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be too obvious here. I guess my concern is when you buy a house, or let's say you own a house or you own some piece of property, and then you go to the bank and say, hey, I also want to buy an additional property. I want to buy a rental property. The bank does their due diligence and they say, hey, we got to make sure that you can afford this new property. And we've got to make sure that if something happens, that you have some type of reserves in order to be able to continue to pay the mortgage on this property, or you've got to pay for it in cash. Now, the gaming industry seems to almost operate in the opposite way, where people can just purchase up all of these studios and then say, hey, either we can't afford it or we're reprioritizing what we're doing and we're not going to continue to pay the salaries of those involved. And that may not be the best analogy, but it's the closest thing that I can think to. The only difference here is that we're not talking about not paying a mortgage. We're talking about people losing their jobs.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that frustrates me about it.
Mr. Nice Guy.
The last thing I'll say real quick is it frustrates me that a game that had so much potential, like Redfall, simply on the premise alone, you're fighting vampires, it's not zombies, it's kind of a different thing, will now never reach its full potential. And I think back to all the other games that were bad at launch, No Man's Sky, Cyberpunk 2077, so many others. So there's been some NBA games, there's been a lot of games that eventually got good and have been successful.
Mm-hmm.
And now we will never know what happened.
Nice Guy, there is a thing that I don't know how much bearing it has on video games, but I know that it had some kind of bearing for the entertainment generally. Particularly, I believe, Warner Brothers or Disney or, one of those big groups of people or whoever. It's hard to keep track of who owns what.
Yeah. Right.
So forgive me. But there was, I believe, a whole movie that was completed in the case of Disney. And there was a whole television, like a whole TV series that was completed in Warner Brothers. And instead of publishing those, they instead just basically declared them dead on their books and wrote them off.
Right.
Not to suggest that the same thing is necessarily happening here, but it does make me wonder what sorts of fiddling with numbers you can do if you opt to, close down one studio in the name of reassessing or redirecting priorities within the organization. I don't know if that's the type of game that's being played, but if that was something that was kosher, then that, I guess, could go some way to explaining the sort of, like you described, weird notion of buying up property after property after property in the gaming world and then just closing this, that, and the other down if there's some sort of a way that further fuels the growth at all costs.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm sure it's not just a money thing. Like, I'm sure Microsoft could afford to keep these studios open, right? They just paid billions and billions to acquire them. But maybe it's just there's simply contracts they don't want to honor, and I'll give you a quick example before we move on. So people who do voice acting, people who do stand-up comedy, people who make movies, whatever it may be, there's often something in your contract that when you put something out there, whether it's on YouTube, Amazon Prime, Sirius Radio, that you get what are called residual payments.
Mm-hmm.
And those may be in perpetuity. They may be for a certain dollar amount. And I can tell you I know this from experience firsthand. And so if there's a lot of people who worked on Redfall that have those type of contracts, and Microsoft says, I don't really want to pay these people. I don't know how it works, but maybe shutting the studio down voids those contracts based on what's written in them, and then they don't have to pay those types of things. This is hypothesis on my part, but I can't help but think that those types of things play a role in these types of decisions. Otherwise, why not just leave it open and let them continue to work? If it was really about reprioritization,
you would see those people being allocated
Yes.
to a different studio to
Yes.
work because they're losing
Yes.
decades of talent, decades of expertise in various gaming systems. You don't need to necessarily know everything about the system or even the Unity engine or whatever engine you're building
Right.
the game in to have worthwhile contributions, and it would be a huge shame to miss out on that. So I agree with you as well. I'm incredibly skeptical of that claim, and bless you for bringing it up.
no worries, man. I like that we're on the same page here. Let's keep it moving. 2 more news stories, and hopefully we get through both of them. Hades 2, out now, which is exciting because I liked Hades 1. This is on GameSpot.com by George Yang. Supergiant Games Hades 2 is now out on early access for PC via Steam and the Epic Games Store. The developer expects that the early access period will last at least through the end of 2024. Over on Steam, the price to access the game is $30. The developer also said that depending on the duration of early access and additional scope, the game's price might be raised at a later date. Mac, I'm curious your thoughts on early access generally, but more specifically, early access for a sequel of a game that was so successful and borderline Game of the Year contender, critically acclaimed and universally beloved, sequel in early access for a year. What do you think?
I think one of the things that is nice about the early access model is, number one, the ability to try something out before all the polish is on there. In some ways, my favorite experiences have been early access things. My favorite game, Chasm, I got to play it all throughout the development process, and in a couple of ways left my own mark on the game itself by the specific things that I broke during early access and that got fixed when it was ready to come out. And I kind of love that feel. It makes the game feel more personal and makes the game feel more magical, even.
Okay.
But on the other side, we have the downside of the early access where it does seem like a game can be put out half-baked or underdone, at least, where we should really not be paying full price for a game that is not yet complete, or at least not feature complete. So I'm of 2 minds about it. On the one hand, I've seen times where it worked out really well. On other hand, I've seen times where it really, really felt like I was just trying to be played the fool and parted with my gold. I can't really say much about this other than I hope that they do good with the goodwill that they've generated from having created such a smash hit in the first Hades game, and do right by everybody even in this.
Yeah, man. I have strong opinions on companies that make a really, really successful first entry and then go to Kickstarter for the second one. I just don't think that is right. There may be exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, I'm not a fan. And I kind of feel the same way about a game like this going into early access.
Mm-hmm.
Just wait until it's ready. Candidly, there's still a lot of people playing Hades. And there's no reason to put this out in early access. It's not a bandwidth thing where you need to test the servers and see how much you can hold in terms of players. It's not a, hey, this is our first game type of thing and we want your feedback. It's a, hey, here's what we've got. Give it a shot. You know it's going to be good. But by the way, there's going to be more coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just not a fan of that type of release. Furthermore, it'll be interesting to see what the rules are surrounding this type of release and Game of the Year candidacy. Because my understanding is that this is already really, really good, what they've put out.
Mm-hmm.
In a year that has been good for games but is a little bit slower, it would be frustrating to see something like this win when it's not completely
So
polished.
when do we start the clock on Game of the Year discussions? Is it when it finally does its proper release? And what with the length of game development cycles, what if its proper release isn't even until 2025?
Yeah, I don't know. But, here's the thing. There have been games that have been in early release or early access for 5 years, 10 years, right? And they just keep improving them and patching them, and that's fine. But I almost wonder, back to the Microsoft thing, what would have happened if they put Redfall out in early release? It probably would have been given a lot more benefit of the doubt than it was given, and maybe that studio still exists. Although, candidly, I think Microsoft knew that they were going to close these studios at acquisition. So that's just my thoughts there. Mac, last news story, and we don't really have a ton of time, but I just wanted to let you and all the people know Nintendo Switch successor will be revealed by April 2025. And yeah, right, this fiscal year, it'll be revealed. So we know it's coming. It's rumored that it's going to have magnetic Joy-Cons, which I think is extremely interesting. I don't know about the idea of putting magnets next to your game console.
I mean, we barely know how they work in the first place, so
we'll see. But bottom line is that was announced today in a tweet by Furukawa, one of the big wigs at Nintendo. So hey, look forward to it.
I will also say I think I saw floating around a tweet or a thing that they expressly will not be discussing the Switch successor in the next Nintendo Direct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. They'll just discuss plans for the second half of the year in terms of games. So that is our news for the week.
All right. Well, now that we've taken a look at what's going on right now, let's take a little look into the past. Some video game history for some formative moments in our favorite hobby. Mr. Nice Guy, it has been a heck of a week for video games. It's hard to even know where to start. So I guess I'll start as far back as possible. 1992. A little game released on the PC, a little game called Wolfenstein 3D. Early shooter. Obviously, we owe a lot of the early sensibilities that we would have in Wolfenstein 3D repeated in Doom that would really start the FPS genre, as it were. And the, of course, amusing thing about the way that they generated the game so that it looked like you were in a 3D environment, but it was not actually a three-dimensional. The objects you saw were not three-dimensional in the strict sense. They were rendered within your field of view. It is very interesting, technical, but it was one of those cool sort of technical shortcuts in order to make something happen where the technology was just not quite there, but they were able to just barely make it feel that way, which was really cool. Another one, we'll step a few years farther forward, 2003 for the Game Boy Advance. One of the reasons I was thinking about this one earlier, Mr. Nice Guy.
Nice.
Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. Released for the GBA. Man, and while it is in and of itself kind of this cool idea of, Dracula's a problem because we've got this solar eclipse going on and everything, one of the things that I particularly liked about it was the fact that it had a mechanic not entirely unlike my favorite video game series, Mega Man, employed in there. In that some of the characters, some of the enemies, as you killed them, you would basically get a power-up from them that you could use in the future. Whether that was specific sub-weapons or a new movement or attack tech, it was definitely cool. And it drew on that in a way that others had not previously. But all right, moving along, another good one, and I'll just, there's not too much to say about this, but 2009 for the PC, Plants vs. Zombies. Hang on just a second.
Yeah, Mac is handling some technical difficulties right now. He's taking out the trash, ladies and gentlemen. Gotta love doing a live show. But tell me more about Plants vs. Zombies.
Like, what do you say about Plants vs. Zombies? There's plants. There's zombies. The zombies start on one side of the screen. They move to the other. You try your plants. It's a, it's a real-time strategy game on one dimension.
Yeah, I've played it, actually.
But it is, nonetheless, a fun game. And while I don't think Plants vs. Zombies will ever be featured as a best games of all time, I will say that I think Plants vs. Zombies, much like a game like Angry Birds,
okay,
got into the public consciousness in a way that a lot of video games did not, and still kind of don't. It was definitely one of those early polished mobile game experiences. Ishmobile, a fantastic summation of the words that I could not cobble together. The sweet spot of mobile and gaming.
Nice. Well put. Well said.
Yes, well said, sir. Well, let's move on to 2018. A little game called rather God of War, really. Immortal Lines, brought to life by Christopher Judge. So many awards across so many awards shows. But Mr. Nice Guy, do you remember the tie-in prequel game for God of War that was only available over Facebook Messenger?
I do not remember that.
Me
at
neither.
all.
I do not remember it one bit, but yet it exists. It was Facebook Messenger. It was basically a text-based adventure game following the sun in the immediate lead-up time before the game started. I have not played it. I don't know if it is still playable because I don't have a Facebook Messenger account. But to any of our listeners, inquiring minds must know, if you can still play that, please try, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Well, and then just one last thing, Mr. Nice Guy, that happened.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, May 8th, will be the 3rd month anniversary of the release of Helldivers 2.
Oh,
probably
nice.
Not foreshadowing at all. But anyway, there is some video game history for you.
Got to give a shout out to God of War 2018 because that game was phenomenal. And if you're a game developer or game studio looking to reboot a franchise or rebrand an IP, that is how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
What a game. What a game. Well, Mac, speaking of Helldivers 2, it's time for our topic of the week, a segment where we talk about something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it. And Mac, this is one of the biggest stories in gaming over the past couple weeks, maybe over the year, because it talks about David versus Goliath. It talks about the gamer versus the corporation. It talks about the little guy or girl who plays the game versus the person who wants to control how they enjoy it. And this is on GameInformer.com, written by Wesley LeBlanc. Here is what he writes, and I want to start with the original story. This is about Helldivers 2, and this is what he wrote on the 3rd of May, 2024. Developer Arrowhead Game Studios and Sony Interactive Entertainment have announced that Helldivers 2 on Steam will soon require a PlayStation Network account to play. All new players from May 30th will have to link their Steam account to a PSN account, and all current players will have to do so by June 4th. Up until this point, a PSN account was not required to play Helldivers 2 on PC via Steam, and with the sudden switch-up, players have taken to the game's Steam reviews to express their frustration. Admittedly, the game's rating is still very positive, blah, 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 blah. So here's the reason that they're saying they wanted this done. SIE, Sony Interactive Entertainment, says due to technical issues at the launch of Helldivers 2, we allowed the linking requirements for Steam accounts to a PlayStation Network account to be temporarily optional. That grace period will now expire. So, want to make it clear, PlayStation console not required to play the game, but they did want people to have a PlayStation account. Now, Mac, this story has since been updated, and here is what the update says. As of the 6th, PlayStation will not be requiring Helldivers 2 players to link their Steam accounts to PlayStation Network accounts following widespread backlash from the game's community. This follows days of turmoil amongst players, leading to Helldivers 2 on Steam dropping from a mostly positive rated game to mixed for all the reviews and mostly negative for recent reviews. Oh, even the first Helldivers, the first game, started receiving bad reviews as a result of this, according to developer Arrowhead Games CEO. Mac, thoughts on this? Number one, let's start with what was going to happen. Being required to make a PlayStation ID to play a Steam game, and supposedly due to a grace period expiring. Thoughts there?
Press X to doubt, I believe, is the starter. I mean, I think it's always fair to be skeptical about, what they're saying about, we let this go through the good of our hearts or what have you. So, I mean, a little bit skeptical. But I think, Mr. Nice Guy, that it's worth me asking some stuff because, I know that some people were frustrated that 3 months after this game came out, people found that they enjoyed it, that they were going to either have to do that or lose it. I did not realize that apparently there are a lot of places in the world that you can't actually get a PlayStation account.
Oh, I did not know this, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and this is a bit surprising that according to what I was reading, 177 countries of the world, out of a total of 195, you can't actually get a PlayStation Network account.
What?
That seems crazy to me.
Just curious, just because, people are going to ask, we try to be accurate here, what is the source on that? Is that like a video game webpage, or where are we finding that?
That would be on one of the IGN updates to that.
Okay.
Quick editor's note, I mistyped this when I put it into my notes for the night. It's not that 177 of 195 countries can't get PlayStation Network accounts. It's that 77 of 195 can. So only 60% of the countries of the world can you not get a PlayStation Network account. With a little asterisk, you could always lie and say that you weren't in one of those countries, that it's not available, but then you're breaking the terms of service and can get everything pulled from you anyway. So it's not a good situation, basically. But Mr. Nice Guy was 100% right. That number seemed incorrect, and totally incorrect. His instincts, spot on. Even if it weren't 90%, and this is where I was going to go with, even if it wasn't 90%,
right,
50%, 40%, even 30%, I think would be too onerous of a restriction for me to feel okay about that, Especially because we're in that situation where they already took your money. And decided to walk away,
Okay, but let's address that because Steam has been doing a good job of offering refunds for people who were upset about this. But so I want to say, if we're complaining about money, Steam is doing the right thing.
Good guy Steam. Steam's doing the right thing. Do you think Sony's gonna pay up to Steam for those refunds that they process?
Oh, I'm sure they're not.
So, I mean,
but Steam earns goodwill, and they'll
Steam earns.
I mean, let's not. This is a totally different topic. Sometimes we treat Steam like they are not a big corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and the reality is they are.
Yes.
So I mean, I don't know if I feel bad for Steam, losing out on this money. I would agree with you that it's not their fault.
Yeah.
It's a PlayStation thing, and maybe PlayStation should have to shoulder some of the costs, but Steam is going to be just fine.
Oh, yeah. But I think I'm not crying tears for Steam. What I am is I'm just pointing out that I don't think in a million years that Sony's going to make it right with Steam over those things. There's no respect for PlayStation for anybody.
Here's the thing too, it's interesting, the timing, because I feel like Sony is going to quote unquote get away with this because of what's happening with Xbox right now.
They absolutely will.
Even more so because of the Xbox layoffs that happened so close to what Sony just did.
Alternative view, Mr. Nice Guy, is Microsoft timing their layoffs to try and skate under the radar while we're still mad at Sony?
Yeah, it didn't work, but
Yeah.
it could have been. It could have been the same. It could have been a strategy.
Could have been.
I generally when I'm out somewhere and they say, hey, if you sign up for X, Y, or Z, we'll give you a free T-shirt or we'll give you $20, $500, whatever it is. I never sign up for those types of things because my personal information and my time are worth more than these little trinkets or a few dollars. But what's even worse, Mac, is if I do own something, if I have paid for something, and then the company says, oh, by the way, now you also have to do this in order to keep using the thing that you have paid for. And that's basically what happened with Helldivers 2. Now, as someone who owns all the consoles, has IDs, to me, it's not a big deal. But I can understand someone who only has Steam or who, for whatever reason, has chosen not to make a PlayStation Network ID. Being forced to do so would be frustrating. So I completely empathize with those people, and I'm glad that we have gotten past it. Mac, I also want to ask you this, because in addition to gamers getting this changed, gamers have now started a campaign to go on Steam and fix the Helldivers 2 ratings by leaving positive ratings as a result of this change. A lot of power lies in community. In gaming, in politics, in whatever. What do you think about this level of power lying in the gaming community? Now, right now, and I'm not trying to give you a leading question, but right now it's being used for something that is positive. What do you think about the potential for it to go the other way in the future?
Well, we've definitely seen it go the other way in the future. I think Gamergate's a great example of pushing community for harassment. So, I mean, we absolutely see it go and cut both ways. And not just in video games, in everything. When there's a sports team that gets together, or sports team fans, tailgating, fun part of the community, fun part of the things. Because I have been to a sports ball event before.
I'm sure you have.
But also, when people get a bit rambunctious afterwards and, tip over a couple of cars and light them on fire. This happens too from people both celebrating and otherwise. And that happens after a big game. Maybe whether your team won, it's a celebration. Maybe whether your team lost, it's an expression of dissatisfaction. But it does happen in basically any group that considers themselves a community. You can push yourself for good, you can push yourself for evil pretty easily one way or the other. So, I mean, I wouldn't give us gamers that much credit. If we really, as video gamers, wanted to work against these sorts of changes, I feel like, we could get the devs to stop killing games, maybe.
Right?
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Right?
And that I sincerely hope that, this is an eye-opener for some people, that these are the types of things that, that Sony feels like they can just do. And what would have happened? Would they have gotten away with it? Yes, they absolutely would have gotten away with it.
But those pesky kids stopped them.
Kids were loud enough and bombed the potential future profits of that game. And keep in mind, I mean, given how many people were going to be shut out, they were like, for whatever reason, PlayStation thought, as they were crunching the numbers, because those aren't stupid people crunching those numbers, but they thought it was more worthwhile to them to lose out on whatever percentage of people weren't going to make a PSN account in favor of the people who were going to make a PSN account so that they could keep playing. That was the calculus in their heads, and it turned out wrong, but at the end of the day, that's all that they cared about. They cared about getting people on PSN with PSN accounts, not with making sure that people could play the art or enjoy the thing that, I mean, Arrowhead Studios, right? Their first game was Magicka way back in 2011. They did Gauntlet Slayer Edition back in 2014, and then the first Helldivers game in 2015. They're definitely a game dev that has worked hard to tell fun, quirky, enjoyable stories through the medium of video games. But, I don't think Arrowhead Games would have wanted people to be cut out of the Helldivers 2 experience. I think PlayStation Studios, the publisher, definitely just wanted to push that, and that was their thing. So I hope this is a wake-up call that we need to keep using our, collective weight in the game industry for this kind of good thing.
Dude, I don't think I could have said it better. I agree with like 99% of what you said. We could talk about this all day, but we don't have time for that. And so that has been our topic of the week.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and take a look, Mr. Nice Guy, now at a game that's trying to get off the ground, a Kickstarter project, if you will. We call this Kick or Kickstart. Now, I'm putting a link in the account here, I'm putting a link in the chat here. Fair warning, headphone warning if you're going to watch the video. It does start jarring with the sound there. So, this game is a little one called They Came from Dimension X. So if you're watching it, it should really be giving you maybe OG Half-Life vibes or Quake vibes. It's a first-person shooter game, heavy on the cosmic horror, but there is a special 3D gimmick in this game that sets it apart from what you can see pretty quickly. And that is that basically you'll move on any surface, so there's no real cardinal down directions. So in this way, it has a bit more in common with the control scheme of... Okay, this isn't an ideal comparison, but a bit more in common with the sort of flight simulator in the sense that, your positioning is a bit more relative. I can see some reactions already, but we've got Tim Maccabee. This is his first Kickstarter project, though he has worked on some small indie games in the past. If you were interested at all in this, you can get a digital copy of it. Estimated delivery date December of this year, so only about 7 months out, for $15 for a digital copy of the game. Lots of Geiger inspired, going to be, I believe, 30 different maps over the course of 4 different episodes, kind of, again, a sort of callback to the old stuff. It's noteworthy that that Tim here has as his profile picture and several other call-outs to the old Commander Keen series of games that was released as sort of in episodic form. As I understand it, this game will be released, and it will be the total altogether at the time in December, but it will be put into those chapters. Even the first chapter, Lost on Mars, is vaguely reminiscent of the episode 1 of Commander Keen, Marooned on Mars. So anyway, all that being said, Mr. Nice Guy, interested in your take, my good man.
I'm absolutely not interested in this. And, one of the things we pride ourselves on is we're going to be honest and we're going to be objective. Mm-hmm. I also want to be respectful because I like that someone's making a game and pursuing their dream and trying to do their thing. And actually, I'm a huge fan of Commander Keen. So I like that this guy also has Commander Keen as his avatar. But other than that, Mac, there's absolutely nothing about this that appeals to me. I'm fine with boomer shooters. I'm fine with retro style games. But I feel like there's a difference between making a game in retro style and making a game that looks like it was built in a retro engine. Because there is a space for that, but a lot of these types of games, we want stuff that looks old but still has quality of life features like it was actually built in 2024. And just looking at this, it doesn't give me that vibe. This looks like it was made in 1990, and ain't nobody got time for that. I'm just being very blunt with our audience, right?
Sure.
There's not a lot I like about this. One of the things I've always been taught in comedy, in presentation, in podcasting, You want to leave your audience wanting more. This is a 6-minute video, and just as you were talking, I watched the first 90 seconds. It got to a point where it seemed like it was going to end, and then it's going to go on for 4.5 more minutes, which makes me question his game-making ability as well. This does not appeal to me, and I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, I hear what you're saying. I just want to quote this little line from the thing. It's near the end of the Kickstarter project here. Can I try before I pledge my devotion? You sure can. You can download the demo from either itch.io or Steam, and be sure to wishlist of it, of course. The demo itself doesn't quite represent the performance and quality of the current game or the final game, but it still provides what we think is a solid experience and will help you understand the design principles and direction of the game. So, Mr. Nice Guy, some of us might be good at making games, but maybe not so good at making a pitch video. But that is precisely why being able to try the game out, play a demo is what's so important, and we do have that here.
Okay, but does this look like it's going to be a good game to you? And have you played the demo?
Yes, I did try out the demo. I actually like it, Mr. Nice Guy. I think he's right to say that this isn't necessarily fully indicative of where it's going to be. But you were talking about houses earlier. However, super briefly, I feel like it's got good bones. I like the vibe of it. I like where he's going with it, and the demo gives me hope that this thing will be good with some more time. I think it still has a ways to go. Does it have, December of this year? Well, we always build in a little bit of skepticism in the Kickstarter release dates, obviously. But I actually think this is worth taking a risk on for $15.
I don't. No, it's not, Mac. It's not. Because you can get Stardew Valley for $10.
I already have Stardew Valley.
But you get my point, dude. The value...
Games are not fungible like many other items. They are unique experiences that you cannot find other ways.
I agree. But at the same time, you have to be self-aware of what you're charging relative to the market. The other thing I'll say, and I wish that there was a way to know how Steam determines which games show up in the games like this section. Because when I look at the Steam page for this game, it says that this game is similar to Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 3, and Deep Rock Galactic are the first 3 that show up.
Interesting.
Now, I know that's not always accurate, but I just don't like those comparisons at all.
Yeah, no. The comparison should be Half-Life, Quake, maybe a Call of Cthulhu game. Those should be the ones that are showing up in the sidebar. Yeah, it would be interesting to know, but at the same time, this, I think, thematically is interesting to me. I like where it's going, and having tried the demo, like I said, I think it's got good bones. I think it could be good, and yeah. I mean, $15... Sure, maybe a little bit high, but I mean, it's not like he's asking 25. And I see a lot of Kickstarters that don't have a demo, that have a bit more razzle dazzle, yes, but are like, give us $25 and doing quite well. This is one that I think is asking a bit more reasonable. It does have a demo, it does have good bones, and it does interest me. And it's totally okay that we don't agree on that.
Mac. You can get Hollow Knight at full price for $15. Celeste is regularly $5 on sale. And I understand different games, different experiences. But
what
I think
about supporting an independent dev, Mr. Nice Guy?
Listen, we support them all the time, Mac, by simply talking about their games. And candidly, I've purchased some of our top 5 games last year and gifted them to people. But here's what I will say. Game developers, if you're making your first game and you're not sure of it, it is okay to put the game out for free on itch.io or Steam and then link your audience to where they can donate. Whether that's a Venmo, whether that's a Patreon, but to ask for their money up front in some instances just is not the route to go, and that's how I feel about this.
All right. Well, it's clearly a kick from Mr. Nice Guy. A kickstart, in case you couldn't tell from me. We do, of course, wish everybody well in this, but yeah, if you're interested, they came from Dimension X. Take a look, and even, of course, because it has a playable demo, give it a shot for yourself. But that has been Kick or Kickstart.
Well, good to know. Hey, it's time for Nerd Flex.
Woo-hoo.
A segment where you, the viewers, try to stump the host. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. We're 305 episodes in. Do I really need to explain how this works?
Yes, every
do it.
time, Mr. Nice Guy. New people, all the
New
time.
people come in. New people come in. It's true. So this is a segment of the show where if you're here live, you have a job to do. Let us know in the chat. A gaming-related multiple-choice question. Mac and I will use nothing but our noggins to try to answer it. No Google, no phone a friend, none of that stuff. And we'll try to get the correct answer. Now, we also have a test bank of questions where Mac and I use nothing but our noggins to try to get the answer correct. But if you're here live and you have a question, let us know. But Mac, I think we're going to start out with a question today from the test bank. How does that sound?
Sounds great. What does that wild and crazy randomized bank of test questions have for us today?
And I always click this like 5 or 6 times
Mm-hmm.
just to hopefully get us one that we do not know. And here's one that I don't know the answer, and maybe you do. This is a Sega question. What does VMU stand for?
Oh,
Sega.
yeah.
What does VMU stand for?
So the VMU was a peripheral for the Dreamcast, and I think it was
Jeez.
like the virtual memory unit or whatever. And PlayStation had one kind of like this as well, but like you would plug it. Well, in the PS1, you would plug it into the memory card slot, but on the Dreamcast, the memory card slot was in the controller, so you'd plug it into the controller. It had like a little screen on it so that you could like use that for specific interactivity, like the mini map would show up on the Dreamcast VMU and such. Anyway, but I think the VMU stands for Virtual Memory Unit.
Dude, so if I was just sitting here and I was trying to come up with 3 letters, it's probably what I would have. I probably would have said virtual machine undercarriage. I don't know. I would have come up with something. But I think virtual memory unit sounds a lot more realistic. So let's go with that. Final answer. Mac, I can't give you full credit. It's actually the visual.
Visual! What did I say?
Memory
Virtual
unit.
memory unit?
You said
oh,
virtual.
Yeah. Okay.
But, if you were taking a test and I was the teacher, I would take a red marker and I'd give you 2 out of 3.
Oh.
Because you got 2 of them right, and I'm that cool teacher, the one who sits backwards in the chair and talks to you about your problems, wants to give you as much credit as you can. So,
Mr. Nice Guy, it's like I'm in a 90s PSA there with you.
I love it. Don't do drugs, kids.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to our next question. This is a Capcom question. What were the first Zelda games to be developed by Capcom? What were the first Zelda games to be developed by Capcom? Now, I think I know the answer here.
I'm going to have to rely on you, Nice Guy.
So, I'm pretty sure that Minish Cap
Okay.
was developed by Capcom. No pun intended, Minish Cap, Capcom. But I also think that Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons were developed by Capcom and not actually by Nintendo. Those are the Game Boy Color Zelda games. And those came before Minish Cap because they were Game Boy Color. Minish Cap was Game Boy Advance. So, and also the fact that the question says games, plural, almost gives the answer away.
Yeah.
Makes me think that it's Minish Cap, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. Mac, what are your thoughts?
I'll go with you on that. But to give credit where credit is due, Mr. Nice Guy, I think most people would not catch on to the subtlety there of games by Capcom and have assumed that it was 2 linked games. I think you do yourself a disservice by being like, they gave it away. No, Mr. Nice Guy, you are just that clever. And this is not going to age like milk because you're going to flip that thing and you're going to be 100% right. Seasons and ages, I'm with you, 100%.
Final answer, Dude, we're correct.
You're
Oracle
correct.
of Ages and Seasons. Read between the lines, kids. Read between the lines.
Well, our third and last question for this segment of Nerdflex is from Ishmobile. The question is, in Grounded, what do you use dandelion fluffs for? Is it to A, slow your fall, B, for protection against mint damage, C, as arrow fletching, or D, baiting in the ladybugs? Now, I have not played Grounded, but I'm leaning to A for some reason. Mr. Nice Guy, what do you think?
My first instinct was slow your fall as well. Grounded is like a game where it's almost like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yeah, 100%.
Slowing your fall. I played this in, I believe, early access or when it first came to Game Pass, and I don't remember there being a lot of issues with fall damage, but I do remember interacting with bugs and spiders and stuff.
Well, I seem to recall in my mind's eye the cover of the game has like somebody doing a sort of Mary Poppins style, but with the dandelion. So,
dude, I think that's a good thing, and I forgot about that until you said it. Let's go with it. A final answer.
All right, a final answer. Turns out it's completely wrong. It was a stylistic choice by some artist who hadn't played the game. Woohoo! A! They function like parachutes to allow you to fall any distance with no damage, and we are right about the cover showing it. Thank goodness you forgot that it was on the cover, because otherwise we would have never gotten it.
Mac with the photographic memory. That has been Nerdflex.
All right. Well, now we turn to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
I am not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast, and I have a very, very short update for you. And it's a time for me to eat some humble pie, because, Mr. Nice Guy, back in episode 296, I was very skeptical about the April jury trial in Hayden v. 2K Games. Now, I will say in my defense, when I was talking about it, no one actually seemed to have a link to the docket or to the trial date, but it did in fact happen. I expressed some concern. I was just like, what are people talking about this jury trial? I can't find a docket for this, and nobody has a link to the docket. Is this even happening? Because there's like 7 Hayden v. 2K lawsuits, because he keeps issuing a new lawsuit for them using the tattoos that he inked and has copyrights on LeBron James and other various sports peoples, and they keep consistently redoing those infringements each time they put out a new game with those players in it that have his tattoos. So
for the viewers, for the listeners at home, when Max says sports people, that's what you and I know as athletes. Just wanted to translate. Please continue.
Sports people is the technical term, obviously. So at the main thrust of this has been that a tattoo artist may have a copyrighted design, and they ink that onto a person's skin, and now it's a part of that person's likeness. And people have a certain right to license their likeness how they see fit. And so we've got a set of conflicting notions here. The rights of the tattoo artists to have their copyrighted works, the rights of the famous individuals, the sports people, as we would say in the biz, to control their likeness, and the licensing of said likeness. And of course, the poor $20 billion company 2K caught in the mix, who couldn't possibly ever have any ideas that this would be a notion. It's my skepticism aside. The jury found for 2K. And while we'll see if this continues to be the case, because this is not the only suit, but it does seem to be that the tide is turning against the tattoo artist Hayden in this, as well as in the other suits as well. But we'll see if there's some angle there that I don't see. We'll, bring it up later. But it looks like it's swinging more toward the game company and away from the tattoo artist. So that's the update for you, and I'll let you know if I get more interesting documents in my hands and perhaps a better explainer in the future. But that's just a quick legalese for you today.
That was a cool legalese. I really liked that. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to episode 305 of Two Nerds in a Pod. We appreciate the raid that just came in from our good friend Alex Mann. Appreciate all of you who commented throughout the episode. Y'all are the best. But before we go, we have one last segment called What We've Been Watching and What We've Been Playing. where we talk about all the cool nerdy stuff we've been into across all platforms, gaming and media related. And if you're here live, let us know. We're always looking for more nerdy stuff. Mac, what have you been into?
Well, with the exception of playing a bit of They Came From Dimension X, the demo there, it has been almost exclusively Baldur's Gate 3 for me and my house. And also mostly been watching back episodes of Taskmaster. Into Season 4, have been working backward through the catalog. So, good British gaming TV show, game show, rather. Fun to watch. So, that's what I've been up to. What about you, Mr. Nice Guy?
What have I been playing? Lots of retro stuff on the Analog Pocket. Some people don't understand it. I can't describe how fun it is to play old cartridges on that thing. And I've actually started using cores and playing NES games and some of the arcade stuff that they have on there. There's a Donkey Kong core, and just tons of stuff you can do with different retro consoles. So I've really been enjoying that. Played a little Alfred Chicken today, and that was fun. And, one of the games modern that I've really been into lately is Balatro. And I've talked about this before, but that's a game that I just cannot put down. It's the poker roguelite that is available on Steam, currently on sale for like $13. If you like those types of games, check that out. And as far as what I've been watching, a little bit of NBA playoffs. Watched some of the Hunger Games with my son, who has finished the books. And watched a little bit of the clips of the roast of Tom Brady, which is not usually my thing. But there were some really, really well-written jokes by some very talented comedians in there. And that's about it for me. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 305. I am Mr. Nice Guy. That is Maction. We are two nerds in a pod. Be excellent to each other. So important. Be kind. And keep gaming. Video games are art. I don't know if you knew that, but it's true. And we'll see y'all next week.
Bye.